Interview of Conrad Murray. Conrad Murray relates that Michael Jackson always wanted him to put the things away. He wanted him to put his bags up in the cabinet. Conrad Murray says Michael Jackson told him where to put them in that upper cabinet because he didn't want things laying around. Maybe this was Michael Jackson's idea, that somehow this would conceal it a little bit to be inside of a bag. Not very well. We don't know. There are no medical records, and Michael Jackson is dead. But it is a fact that that tab was not used. It is a fact, according to Dr. White himself, that a spike, an infusion spike, was put into that bottle, and we know that the bottle is essentially empty and has been drained through a spike hole as it hung upside down. And we also know that bottle has the fingerprint of Conrad Murray. So when the defense questioned Dr. Schaefer about this extraordinary interpretation of the facts, this is what Conrad Murray was doing every night, according to himself. Running an infusion, a drip, he called it. 50 milligram bolus followed by a drip. And it explains the blood levels. It's consistent with, if you look at the phone records of what Conrad Murray was doing, if you believe that at 9:20 he's on the phone doing emails, Michael Jackson's not laying there complaining about sleep. Conrad Murray would have to just literally be ignoring him then. Conrad Murray's his employee. You'd have to believe that Michael's laying there saying, "Doctor, put me to sleep," and Conrad Murray's just either not in the room at all or just ignoring him, making phone calls, sending text messages, reading emails. The likely scenario is Michael Jackson was asleep, hooked up to this drip, and Conrad Murray grew so distracted, was either in the room, out of the room. Dr. White says, under his scenario where Michael self-injected, Dr. White says he doesn't believe that was during the 2-minute time period. He thinks it was an altogether different time period of abandonment. Let alone their theory that Michael Jackson swallowed lorazepam pills, which would be altogether another time period of abandonment. Dr. Schaefer is the expert in the field. And based on the available evidence and the lack of medical records and the shipments and everything else I just recounted, it is a reasonable interpretation of what happened. But that may be a question that always remains unanswered. It may always remain unanswered how exactly that transpired in that private bedroom. But what you will know, based on the evidence in this case, is that Conrad Murray was a substantial factor in Michael's death as a result of everything we've talked about, and that Michael Jackson died as a result of propofol intoxication. So what did we hear from the defense? Well, we heard from a number of character witnesses. 5 different people came in and praised Conrad Murray. And there's a few important things to note. I'm certain they believed every word they said. They probably got good care. They were all treated in hospitals for something Conrad Murray is trained to do, hearts. They all had heart troubles. They were treated in a hospital. They were given stents. I think it was Andrew Guest who said there was a whole team of people helping. There were heart monitors. There was paperwork that had to be filled out. There were other personnel. There was equipment. And it was for their heart, something Conrad Murray is trained evidently to do. But even setting that aside, there are a few things to note about these witnesses. Number one, we didn't really hear about any witnesses that were under his current care and received those letters in the mail and told he would no longer be their doctor. Gary Cossey had a heart attack in 2000. I believe Andrew Guest had a heart problem in 2002. Dennis Hicks, 1999 or 2000. Ruby Mosley, I think in 2003. Miss Sampson, she did have a heart attack in 1995, then eventually was treated by Conrad Murray, which is interesting because Conrad Murray, she pointed out, was able to review the prior doctor's medical records in making his decision, because the prior doctor kept medical records. And then she did say she had an incident in 2008 and 2009, but it was not clear from her testimony that that was in any way that she was left to fend for herself as Conrad Murray decided to take this position with Michael Jackson. But you did hear from a patient who was currently in active treatment from Conrad Murray at this time, and that was Robert Russell, if you remember. He was one of the phone calls during the time Conrad Murray was at 100 North Carrollwood. And Robert Russell said he got good treatment for his heart from Conrad Murray. But that he, in the midst of treatment and tests and waiting for results, not someone a decade prior or even months prior, but someone who was in the midst of treatment and concerned about his life, concerned about his heart and the test results, he felt completely abandoned and let loose by Conrad Murray. That was an existing patient under the care of Conrad Murray. But all the character witness the defense called, of all the patients Conrad Murray must have treated for heart troubles, they chose to call people who were not currently under the care of Conrad Murray. They were friends, they liked him, but there was no pending test result, no pending stent operation about which they testified. Then the defense called a number of witnesses. They called Dr. Metzger. Dr. Metzger came in to testify about Michael Jackson's prior request for an IV sleep aid. Dr. Metzger and these other witnesses enlightened us on the standard of care and some of the issues that are relevant in this case. Dr. Metzger told us,
is there any amount of money that you would have that would have convinced you to give him intravenous propofol in his house?
Absolutely not.
absolutely not. It's not a shocking statement. It's a predictable statement. Of course he wouldn't. Nobody would. No one ever has. Until Conrad Murray. We heard from Nurse Lee, who shared with us that Michael told her, no, it's safe. It's safe as long as a doctor is monitoring me. The doctor told me it's safe as long as I am monitored.
He said, doctors have told me that it's safe. I just need to be monitored.
That was Michael's state of mind. Nobody's disputing that he wanted the propofol. But he also wanted a doctor there. I'm sure Michael Jackson had the means and resources to get propofol if he really needed to. There is no evidence that Michael Jackson ever sought out or did such a thing without having a medical doctor present. Michael Jackson was not reckless. Michael Jackson had a life ahead of him. Michael Jackson had 3 children that he loved dearly. He wanted propofol to help him sleep. He wanted a doctor with eyes on him to make sure he was safe. Dr. Waldman came in evidently to testify about Demerol. But Dr. Waldman also told us some useful information. And that is that lorazepam is a controlled narcotic controlled by the DEA, and it needs to be kept under lock and key when a doctor has assumed the medical care of a patient. He also told us about the requirement for medical records. And if you recall, I think in my question I asked him if it was required for 3 years, and he said, actually, I think it's 7 years when dispensing controlled substances, of which lorazepam is a controlled substance.
Dr. Waldman, would you agree with the statement as it relates to controlled substances? That state and federal laws require physicians to maintain adequate and accurate medical records. Would you agree with that?
Yes, sir.
And also, as put out by the Medical Board of California, would you agree with this statement as it relates to controlled substances, that a physician is required to keep drugs in a securely locked and substantially constructed cabinet or safe?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Locked up. And medical records kept, documenting which drugs were dispensed. We don't have a single record of any lorazepam being dispensed other than the shipment records from Tim Lopez from the pharmacy. We have Dr. Paul White. And Dr. White was a very notable person in the field of anesthetics. He did do early research into the clinical use of propofol. Dr. Schaefer has been his colleague and friend for many years. Dr. White is now retired. And what you were presented from Dr. White was junk science. It was disappointing. Dr. Schaefer said it was disappointing. It was garbage science. And it's sad that Dr. White came in here for whatever motive he may have had, whether there are financial considerations that he did not share, we don't know. But the foundation of trust between a patient and doctor, that theme extends to the ability to trust science. That it's backed up by academic rigor and testing and data. And that there are principles, fundamental principles of science and truth-seeking behind the science. What Dr. White came in and did was sad for science and sad for truth-seeking. Dr. White came in here, and we know from his first report, inexplicably, he doesn't want to call it a report, he wants to call it a letter. It's a report that was provided to the people in Discovery that laid out his opinions in this case. And from day one, there's only been one consistency from Dr. White. There's been only one thing that he is consistent about. That however he stretches the science, however he stretches the research, however he obscures the literature, he's going to find a way to blame this death on Michael Jackson. He's going to find a theory or way to blame it on Michael Jackson. That is, until it's debunked by Dr. Steve Schaefer, at which point he'll pick a new theory to blame it on Michael Jackson. So in his March 8th, 2011 report, he speculates, he said it was just a speculative thought that he was sharing, that Michael Jackson either drank the propofol or self-injected it. Quickly, he, in April, receives Dr. Steve Schaefer's report. Based on fundamental principles of first-pass effect and what the liver does to propofol when it's orally ingested, Dr. Schaefer concluded that was impossible. Impossible. That's in his report of April 18th. It's impossible. Based on things that first-year medical students know. What your liver does to the oral ingestion of an agent such as propofol, it's impossible that Michael Jackson died as a result of oral ingestion of propofol. So when Dr. White learns of Dr. Schaefer's report, evidently he starts backtracking. But how does he do it? Well, according to the direct examination by Mr. Flanagan, he states he wanted to do his own research. And he suggested that we commission a study in animals. And we did this study. We didn't publish it because I didn't think it was necessarily appropriate for publication. It was negative. The drug that was given directly into the stomach was absorbed and metabolized, and there was no effect. Well, in cross-examination, we learn that this wasn't what you would expect from his testimony as some sort of commissioned official study subject to peer review with data to look at. No, he says, Mr. Flanagan stated that he knew a vet in Indiana who could conduct the study. I did not directly participate. Well, did you review any data or were you provided any reports in regard to that study? No formal report. Only an oral report that had no effect, which confirmed what my suspicion was, and it confirmed what Dr. Schaefer had proposed. And who provided you with this oral report? Mr. Flanagan, this is the level of academic research and rigor that Dr. White sullied this trial with. He essentially has Mr. Flanagan call a guy he knows in Indiana, does some study, and then concludes it's not orally bioavailable, which everyone knew. But that's what